Can I begin my remarks this morning by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. To thank Lee and the team at CEDA for the invitation to speak to you this morning. I want to talk about where Canberra is positioned, entering into its 106th year as a city, and explore some of the opportunities that we have in this, I think, most beautiful, livable, happy, healthy, well-educated city. And it's a great pleasure to be the Chief Minister and Treasurer of the Australian Capital Territory at this moment in our city's history. I've been the Treasurer for nearly 7 years now, which I think makes me the longest serving current Treasurer in the Australian Federation. One of the things about being in a role for an extended period of time, which we don't often get the chance in politics now to work in a portfolio area, even for the length of a parliamentary term, let alone coming into nearly 2 full terms. So you do get to see an economy go through a cycle. And that's certainly the experience that I've had as ACT Treasurer. Seen the worst of the impact of federal government cuts on the ACT economy, and I'm now in a position where, for the first time that I've been Treasurer, we are experiencing the other side of the economic cycle, and that is the pains of growth. I say economics is a dismal science, and I'm beginning to get a real appreciation of how that intersects with the politics of managing a period of rapid growth. As we enter into 2018, we do so against a backdrop of being named by Lonely Planet as one of the top 3 cities in the world that people must visit in 2018. We've got the 2 best airlines in the world flying now daily into our city. Last year we had an all-time record level of both domestic and international visitors to Canberra. Our population growth, as measured between the 2011 and 2016 census, was the fastest of any state or territory. So we are seeing and now living the experience of more people in our city, both residents, those who are coming here to work, who might live across the border. Our city's daytime population is significantly larger even than the growth figures we've seen and reported by the ABS. And we're seeing quite extraordinary levels of employment growth. So we are increasingly confident about Canberra's long-term economic future that over time is less and less reliant on decisions made by the Australian government. We will always have the Commonwealth as a very significant anchor and base on which to build a more diverse territory economy. And I think it will always be the case in our lifetimes that the Commonwealth will be the largest employer, the single largest employer in this city, and clearly is the largest procurer of goods and services in the Southern Hemisphere. Decisions that are made here on a national and international level will continue to be a very important and significant driver for the ACT economy. But it's my view that there's much that we can do as a territory government in partnership with the private sector and the community sector in this city to continue to grow opportunity and to achieve not only economic opportunity but social and cultural growth for Canberra. We need to stay ahead of the pack in what is an increasingly competitive federation. I've, I think, sat on more COAG ministerial councils than anyone else in Australia, I think, over 11 years, and at one point in time holding about 11 different portfolios simultaneously, all of which had their own ministerial councils. I've probably achieved my lifetime quota of said meetings. What I can observe about our federation is that it is not working particularly well, and there is definitely a need for the states and territories to assert more responsibility and leadership independent of the Commonwealth. Some of my colleagues have observed that there was once a time when the premiers would meet and they might invite the Commonwealth to that meeting. Things have changed a little since then, but there is an opportunity through the Council of Australian Federation, through the new board of state and territory treasurers for a more independent approach to both economic, social and productivity reform to be pursued at a state and territory level. And I want to touch on one particular example of that later in my presentation. But to Canberra in 2018, I want to particularly highlight the jobs boom that we are experiencing in a diverse range of sectors. 2017 saw 10,000 additional jobs created in our city. We went from a labour force of 220,000 to 230,000. This growth has outstripped our 10-year average and was faster than the average growth in employment across the rest of the nation. And the happy news for those who are interested in a more diverse ACT economy is that the Commonwealth Government was not a major contributor to that growth. They weren't employing significantly more people. We're responsible for about 500 of those 10,000 new jobs across our health, education, community municipal service areas, emergency services and the like. We have employed additional staff, but the bulk of this jobs growth has come outside of government. Some of it through the extension of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the full rollout in the ACT and a transition out of the public sector, particularly into the community sector. So we have seen growth in those areas, but a lot of this jobs growth has come in sectors of our economy that are generating new wealth and opportunity for Canberra. Higher education, for example, our single largest export earner, grew by 25% last year. They are a big employer in our city, but we've seen growth in tourism, hospitality, in retail, in professional, scientific and technical services, in construction. It's been really broad-based and that's been very encouraging. This is predicted to continue through 2018 and the first jobs data for the year saw a further 800 jobs created in the territory economy in the month of January. So this is very encouraging. We're seeing that feed through into the territory's fiscal position, which after a period of difficulty associated with the Abbott government's first budget, the significant cuts to health and education funding, combining at the same time with the ACT government's need to respond to the Mr Fluffy crisis, saw our territory budget plunge quite deeply into the red. I've been working diligently over the last 4 years to restore that position. The budget update I released just earlier this week showed the deficit for this current year has halved. We'll have a balanced budget next year and we move into a period of modest surpluses over the forward estimates period. This will allow the territory to pay down the Mr Fluffy debt whilst also investing in the infrastructure and services that our growing community will need. We recognise that our city's population growth is very closely tied to the strength of our labour market. Number of unemployed people in the territory only marginally exceeds the number of job vacancies. At this point in time, we have the lowest unemployment rate in Australia. So there will be an importation of labour coming from elsewhere in Australia and overseas to meet critical skill needs in many industries. Economics 101 says that should put some upward pressure on wages. ACT government, as the second largest employer in the city, is conscious of that, and we're in the middle of negotiating our own EBAs with our staff at this moment. But I would anticipate that much anticipated wage growth that I think every economist around the country is talking about and is very topical in the context of company tax cut debates and the like, will start to be a feature of our economy, perhaps ahead of some others, given the tightening of the labour market. It's a great opportunity through this period, though, for us to continue to invest in the skills of our people. And so I have a particular focus, together with my colleague, Megan Fitzharris, the Minister for Higher Education and Training, to ensure that there are an increased number of opportunities for Canberrans who might find themselves unemployed at this point in time to train in the areas where our economy is going to need their labour and their skills into the future. And this, I think, presents an opportunity for Australia's education capital to not only focus on our export earning potential and our opportunities to train Australians, but also to focus on training Canberrans. Throughout this period, it's perhaps come as no surprise to most in the room, the Commonwealth have been shrinking their contribution to state final demand and their activity in the ACT economy. So this growth, some of which is a transition, as I've indicated, away from Commonwealth direct employment into consultancies, and in the case of the NDIS, away from ACT government employment into community sector provision of services. Overall, though, the picture is of a more diverse territory economy and one that the Commonwealth government has not been contributing significantly to the rapid rate of growth. What they have done, though, is stop cutting, and that means they're no longer detracting from the underlying growth that we've been seeing in the territory economy. So we've had a particular focus in terms of our economic development agenda to actively pursue growth in those industries where we have a comparative advantage and where the shift in the Australian economy away from the resource states to economic growth really being driven out of the southeast corner of the country, particularly through the New South Wales and Victorian economies. ACT is very well positioned between Sydney and Melbourne to capitalise on that transition in the Australian economy. Clearly, a lower Australian dollar is helping all of our our service-based export industries, higher education, tourism, professional, scientific and technical services, the export of government services, all of those areas that contribute to the ACT's export earnings are really benefiting from this transition in the Australian economy. I'd like to point out that although we are, I think, about 1.7% now of Australia's population, the ACT now generates 2.5% of Australia's service exports. So we are really ahead of the curve in that transition in the Australian economy, and these growth sectors are contributing significantly to both employment growth and economic growth for Canberra. One key driver has been international tourism. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we now have the two best airlines in the world flying a daily service to Canberra, connecting us with two of the biggest international aviation hubs in our broader region, and competing on price and on quality of product. It's now actually cheaper to get an economy return ticket on Qatar Airways to Europe than it is at times to get an economy return ticket on Qantas between Canberra and Sydney. This tells you something about the challenges that we face in a fairly constrained domestic market, aviation market. We have been, I think, been exploited a little, gouged, you might say, by the cosy duopoly that operates services, domestic services out of our city. So my agenda is very straightforward. I want to make it cheaper and easier to get to and from Canberra. This will support so many industries. And it's not just in aviation, it's in land transport, and we are particularly focused on getting an outcome on improving the Canberra-Sydney rail corridor, working with the New South Wales Government cooperatively and very effectively as part of a Commonwealth faster rail program between cities. So if we can achieve that improvement, get more low-cost carriers flying between Canberra and other major capital cities around the nation, build on the international connectivity, then not only will we grow our international tourism market, we'll grow our domestic tourism market, but we'll also make it easier to do business in this city. This is a key component of our transport strategy for 2018 and beyond. But once people get here, as Adrian alluded in his remarks, you've got to be able to get around the city effectively too. Hence the need to continue to invest in transport infrastructure within Canberra in order to ensure that our growing population and the growing number of visitors can easily access all that the city has to offer. We've been active in seeking new international investment into our tourism and hospitality sector, and a recent mission I undertook to Hong Kong to attract some hotel operators into Canberra has paid dividends already, with the Overload Group taking over the management of our famous Hotel in the new Acton precinct. And this demonstrates that if we appropriately market and raise awareness of the opportunities in Canberra, there is national and international interest in investment in these key sectors. We believe the city has enormous potential. We just need to tell the story, tell it in more boardrooms and in more parts of this country and internationally. My very clear focus, combining the Chief Minister, Treasury and Economic Development and Tourism role, is to promote this city more nationally and internationally. And I think we're seeing the benefits of this in terms of a continuity of policy approach and investment from the Territory Government to make these outcomes possible. Population growth clearly is a driver of economic activity, and it also allows, as the city reaches a certain size, for a range of services and activities to be economically viable. Canberra's population has doubled in the time I've lived in this city, going back to when I arrived in 1977, and I would expect it will double again if I'm fortunate enough to reach the average age of average life expectancy of a Canberran, which is of course higher than anywhere else in the country. So if we continue to offer the wonderful lifestyle, the fantastic health system, and the opportunity for an active lifestyle, then I think not only can we manage this population growth effectively over the coming decades, but ensure that the city continues to be an even better place to live. Now, maybe as I reflect upon this, my experience as a teenager in Canberra was one of boredom a lot of the time. There wasn't a huge amount to do in Canberra in the 1970s and 1980s. It is undoubtedly a much better place to live now than it was then. And that is an important part of our ongoing success. We simply must be a city that is comparatively more affordable than other Australian capitals, must be a place that people want to live in, that must offer as much as we possibly can the experiences and opportunities, both in the employment market and socially and culturally, that will not only attract people but retain them. As I look back on my generation, most of the people I went to school and university with had to leave Canberra in order to pursue their careers or further opportunities. That is less and less the case. And one of the reasons that I think we've been successful as a city over the last decade has been our ability to retain people of all ages. It used to be that people would come here to work and then retire back to where they came from, or buy some affordable property on the New South Wales South Coast and retire down there. Well, I think all of the good affordable property on the New South Wales South Coast has now been bought up. That's less of an opportunity for people, but more and more people want to stay in Canberra, even past their working lives, because of the quality of life in this city. And that, together with the fact that making babies is not going out of style, and we are attracting a greater share of international migration, has seen our population growth exceed most people's expectations. Each time the ABS does their head count, they suddenly find that there's about 10,000 more Canberrans than they had anticipated between each 5-yearly census period. That's a challenge for us. We see some of that demand coming through in our health and education system and calls on services, but we don't always see it flow immediately into our share of the GST revenue and the like. We have had a catch-up on that thanks to the 2016 census, and that's flowed through into the Territory's budget position. We now, though, need to plan for a city of 500,000 people in the early 2030s, possibly even earlier than that if this growth rate continues. We thought we might reach 400,000 people in 2020. We actually got there about 2 years ago. So this necessitates a change in our approach to a range of issues: health and education planning, land release, the need to accelerate taxation reform in certain areas to ensure that we are making it easier for people to move here to meet the growth in our labour market and the demand that will clearly be there, and to allow people who want to stay to be able to downsize into appropriate accommodation close to where they are now so that they don't need to move away from their neighbourhoods and networks of friends and family. So we need a more diverse housing market. We need to get rid of stamp duty to make it easier for people to make that move when their lifestyle changes. And that remains a key focus for the government. Investing in these urban renewal precincts is critical to that. If I've learnt anything in my time in ACT politics, it's that for a segment of the community we can run too fast on change. It's also another group for whom we can't run fast enough. And so trying to simultaneously meet those very different views on how Canberra should manage its growth is one of the great challenges for the Territory Government. So we have settled on an approach that seeks to keep most of Canberra's leafy suburbs exactly as they are, and to seek to focus a lot of our new population growth along our transport corridors and in our major employment centres. So through the establishment of a City Renewal Authority with the task of creating a CBD and curating a CBD that is befitting of Australia's national capital, we anticipate that that work not only involves wonderful livable public spaces, but that our CBD will be home to many more people than it is now. And that is an important part of managing this population growth into the future, creating wonderful spaces that people want to live in. Our challenge is to do this also in a sustainable way. We will become the first city in Australia to be powered 100% by renewable energy in 2020, in 2 years' time. We have secured that renewable energy supply in an innovative policy approach of reverse auctions and a diversity of locations and renewable energy types. It's a policy framework that's now being picked up by other states and territories. We've wanted to establish a renewable energy focus for industry development, for research and partnerships with our university sector, so that Canberra can take that national and international leadership role. So by thinking differently about how we meet our city's energy needs, we've secured really a triple win, delivering affordable and reliable power for Canberrans, cutting our city's emissions and boosting local industry. And this theme of thinking differently about how we approach wicked policy challenges is a great opportunity that we have in the ACT. And so we're thinking differently about land use and taxes. I think people are aware, it's been very topical. I think every ACT election since I announced this reform process has had front and centre the tax mix switch that we're undertaking to phase out inefficient taxes like insurance duties that have now completely gone, and stamp duties, and to replace them with our broad-based land tax. We're now 6 years into that 20-year reform journey, and I'm looking at ways to accelerate this reform. The Prime Minister, I think his first appearance on the Insiders program 12 months ago, endorsed our approach. He noted it was 11 out of 10 for political difficulty. This is true. But I think it's good to have these debates about the best way to raise tax, and even about the level of taxation that should be raised. Well, I do at times find it amusing that there's an extraordinary amount of attention to a couple of $100 of increase in local rates, and no one bats an eyelid at bracket creep in the federal income tax system where as wages grow, people pay an increasing share of income tax that dwarfs any level of revenue that is collected by the Territory Government. So our tax reform program will continue. I've given the very clear commitment that in every budget I deliver as Treasurer, I will continue to cut stamp duty. But in thinking differently about how we might pursue this reform task into the future to ensure that we have a stable and sustainable revenue base that supports our plans to continue to invest in this growing city, I want to take the opportunity to propose a further reform that I think state and territory governments can undertake and implement together to tackle one of the biggest challenges that currently confront every jurisdiction, and that is housing affordability. I think we can agree that the current national conversation on housing affordability and the barriers that are stopping people to enter home ownership, it's a pretty poor conversation. Leaders across all political parties in all states and territories are clear that we want to put home ownership back within reach of young Australians, particularly those on low and middle incomes. But the reality is that most state budgets are built on ever-increasing stamp duty revenue. Tens of thousands of dollars extra that people who are trying to get into the housing market are having to find. And it's a problem. And if we are serious about addressing housing affordability, states and territories should start by getting rid of stamp duty for first homeowners. Most jurisdictions have schemes in place that go part of the way to achieve this. There's concession and exemption schemes, there's a variety of different eligibility thresholds. Overall, though, these tend to lag behind the real price of a home in most of the markets where they are applied. The question, of course, is how to pay for a reform like this. I think you can achieve this, scrapping stamp duty for all first home buyers in a way that doesn't blow a hole in state and territory budgets by simultaneously abolishing the first homeowners grant at the same time as you abolish stamp duty. Stamp duty is an unfair hurdle. The first homeowners grant, though, no longer serves the purpose for which it was created. And arguably it now makes housing less affordable. The Productivity Commission has noted this. Its findings are that grants, the homeowners' grants, have in fact fuelled price growth by adding many times their dollar value to the borrowing power of purchasers, distorting decisions about where and the type of product and what type of property homeowners buy, and channeling demand into particular segments of the market that has resulted in prices being driven up further. So instead of the grants going to buyers, in effect they're being handed over to first home sellers, potentially with a little bit extra on top, given the nature and design of these schemes around the nation. So through this proposal to abolish the first homeowner stamp duty and grants across Australia, governments could deliver a far more effective support mechanism to those trying to enter into the housing market. We're prepared to do this in the ACT by accelerating the removal of stamp duty, specifically for first home buyers, ahead of our broader phase-out. So I'll cut stamp duty in every budget for everyone, but I think we can move even faster for first home buyers. I'll be putting this on the agenda for discussion at the next meeting of state and territory treasurers, and I'll ask my colleagues to support this reform. This year, coincidentally, is my turn to chair the Council of the Australian Federation. And I mentioned in the COAG press conference that perhaps was overshadowed by issues relating to the Deputy Prime Minister, that the states and territories would seek through our Board of Treasurers to pursue more economic reform outside of the COAG arena. And this is a very practical opportunity that we can pursue, and I intend to do so. In conclusion, we're very proud of where Canberra sits now, the national leadership role that we've played across economic policy, productivity reform, social inclusion, renewable energy, being the first jurisdiction to fully roll out the NDIS. We've demonstrated that a small jurisdiction in a competitive federation can lead and others will follow. We've demonstrated that good public policy is also good politics. And everything we've done that's been ambitious in the reform agenda has now, in large part, been through 2 elections. And I'm very confident that this community embraces reform and embraces the implementation of good public policy. So as I look ahead to the balance of this Legislative Assembly term and to the 2020 election, I do so with confidence that Canberra will continue to be a national leader in policy reform and that we can implement good policy here and demonstrate to the rest of the nation and to some other parts of the world the benefits of the successful implementation of good ideas. We're making a lot of progress and it's a wonderful time to be a Canberran. Thank you very much.